So this is the Kudila television channel broadcast on the internet under the banner of the Baby Angel Geronimo Editions. This is part B of the day's broadcast, which is Saturday, the 16th of September 2023. One of the Baby Angel Geronimo essays, Updater Diagnostics, is based on the piece by the Times's, London Times's current, quote, legal editor, Jonathan Ames or Ames, Ames, who published the piece in the Times' debrief on page 55 on Thursday, the 14th of September 2023. And the heading is a modest heading, not giving too much away of the facts, but it contains some gems of disclosures. It's headed From Lavish Bash to Fraud Claims. Now, there is a picture of a crook looking like a white boy criminal that he is, as Modhiwadia. Pragnesh Modhiwadia is said to have been, quote, qualified as a solicitor in 2008 and was one of the partners at a corrupt criminal outfit called Axiom, who were suspended by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, SRA. Now, Pragnesh Modhiwadia is a typical crook, and in the piece, Jonathan Ames has a go twice at the regulator, which he doesn't name, but actually means the nor Samantha Palma, the partner at the solicitor's firm Pinsent Masons, another very big corrupt firm of solicitors in London, who is understood to have managed Ince's purchase from administration. They didn't respond to requests for comment. Ames doesn't say requests by the Times for comments. So the whole piece is in need of clarification, emphasis, elaboration, etc., which is exactly what the English legal criminality is about, is like. Now, the first paragraph on the crook Pragnesh Modhiwadia, under the heading From Lavish Bash meaning party, indulgence in party drinks, etc. So that must have been a reference to the event organized by the crook in Mayfair in central London. Pragnesh Modhiwadia was riding high only 6 weeks ago. The management partner of what had recently become Axiom Inns hosted a bash at a Mayfair club in London that had all the hallmarks of celebrity debauchery rather than staid city legal practice. Now, debauchery is, of course, a reference to open orgasmic or orgasmic sex openly. Let's get a definition of debauchery just to be on the safe side in terms of evidential reference. Extreme indulgence in bodily pleasures and especially sexual pleasures, behavior involving drugs, alcohol, etc. That is often considered immoral. So there is an example of a sentence where debauchery in that way has been used. He was glad when others joined them, men and women, and they had more drink and spent the night in wild rioting and debauchery. Debauchery definition and meaning in Merriam Webster dictionary in the USA. Extreme indulgence in bodily pleasures, and especially sexual pleasures, behavior involving sex, drugs, alcohol, etc., that is often considered immoral. And this example that I have already written was authored by somebody called Upton Sinclair, who wrote, he was glad when others joined them, men and women, and they had more drink and spent the night in wild rioting and debauchery. He had continued his debaucheries, having chartered a private plane for himself and a bunch of fringe celebrities to go to Corfu for a week of hardcore partying. Evgeny Peretz, and it is archaic meaning is seduction from virtue or duty. Like St. Augustine carousing his student days away in 4th century Carthage, Thomas Marton had succumbed to such physical and intellectual debaucheries as New York offered a Columbia undergraduate in the 1930s. Wine, women, and some communist fellowship, written by Mark Silk, New York Times Book Review, 30th of March 1986. They regard all music and everything pleasant as forms of debauchery and will not confess to any knowledge or practice unless you can convince them that you are as abandoned a profligate as themselves. Bernard Shaw, letter 25th of November 1948, etc., etc. Now, this Indian descended Pragnesh Modhiwadia, the criminal, of course, was indulging in debauchery at the Mayfair event, and he was not behaving, nor were any of the participants or invitees behaving in any way that could be remotely identified as the behavior of people with integrity, dedication, morality, ethics, etc. Now, we shall be talking more about Pragnesh Modhiwadia and his criminality before the end of this particular edition because there is a lot to say about the Law Society, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the Solicitors General overall role. And we go back to the Morning Star, the weekend edition of the Morning Star, which has got on page 8 under features. The anti Semitism Labour controversy. Important victory. That is Morningstar saying. And the subheading is former London Mayor Ken Livingstone and former Labour Councillor Pam Bromley explain, that is the piece in underneath that, why they have now accepted the EHRC's settlement offer. So let's have a read of this as far as I can bear to read it. In its 2020 report into alleged anti Semitism in the Labour Party, the Equality and Human Rights Commission claimed we, that is Livingstone and Bromley, had contributed to Labour's unlawful harassment of its Jewish members. After a lengthy legal process in which we challenged the government Kwango's finding against us, we have accepted a settlement offer made by the EHRC, bringing the judicial review to a close. We, that is Livingstone and Bromley, firmly support freedom of expression, and we were worried that the purpose of the EHRC report was to shut down criticism of Israel. Back when the EHRC report was published in 2020, pro Israel activists like David Hirsch were quick to make assertions about its implications. Hirsch proclaimed the EHRC has crystallized a new legal precedent that the Livingstone formation is anti Semitic. The so called Livingstone formation, according to Hirsch, is the phenomenon of responding to an accusation of anti Semitism with a counter accusation of Zionist bad faith. Unquote. That is from David Hirsch. The purpose of this ridiculous notion, this is Livingstone and Bromley saying, is to silence anyone who asserts anti-Semitism charges. Moreover, following the report's publication, anti-Corbyn barrister Adam Wagner claimed that the EHRC report's most important legal principle was that calling out false anti Semitism claims was not just unlawful, it was harassment. If Harsh's and Wagner's claims were true, that would be that would have had serious consequences for pro-Palestine campaigners in Britain who are routinely targeted by false anti Semitism accusations in order to drive them out of public life. As elected politicians, we, Ken Livingstone and Pam Bromley, had a duty and we had every right to publicly state our views and opinions, including on the so called Labour anti Semitism crisis. We strongly believe this is not in the past tense, in the present, current tense, like today. We strongly believe that the EHRC's finding against us was erroneous and based on distorted versions of our political remarks. With the support of the Left Legal Fighting Fund, which assists activists, protesters, and whistleblowers, I'll read that again. With the support of the Left Legal Fighting Fund, which assists activists, protesters, and whistleblowers, we started a judicial review against the EHRC and we instructed solicitors in December 2020. We challenged the EHRC's finding that our remarks about anti Semitism in Labour were not protected under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which safeguards freedom of expression. When we first brought the case, We initially expected it to reach court by the end of 2021. However, various delays meant that the case ran on for almost 3 years, which is highly unusual. In the end, there was real prospect that there would be no judgment until 2024, and then a real possibility of an appeal taking another year. The case had also become increasingly complex. In February 2023, that is this calendar year, the court gave permission to the pro Israeli lobby group Campaign Against Anti Semitism to intervene in the case. The Campaign Against Anti Semitism, which lobbied the EHRC to investigate the Labour Party in 2018, was seeking to defend the EHRC report's finding, despite the EHRC having its own very well funded legal team. However, the CAA is now unable to make its arguments in court, despite likely having spent tens of thousands of pounds in legal fees. The lobby group's desire to interfere in the case has essentially been thwarted thanks to EHRC's offer to settle. While much of the internal aspects of the case must remain confidential, we can say with some confidence that our legal action against the EHRC has given the regulator pause for thought. The strength of our legal team and our stamina were, we think, a surprise to the EHRC and also to the CAA. Huge resources have now been expanded, not just on producing the report, but also on defending it. I'm reading the piece that is bylined to Ken Lyings to Livingston and Pam Bromley. We would be very surprised if something like the EHRC anti Semitism report could ever be published again, given the robust challenges that would doubtlessly be made. Our lawyers believed that the legal merits of the case were strong. The merits were also clear from the fact that the case was granted permission to proceed by a senior High Court judge. However, faced with months, if not years, of more legal development, we decided to accept a drop hands deal offered to us by the EHRC, in which each side withdraws from the case and bears its own costs. Thankfully, the cost implications for us, despite a lengthy 32-month process, were much lower than the EHRC's. We spent no more than £35,000, whereas the EHRC spent more than 6 times as much at over £215,000. We think the EHRC understood. I'll read that again because I have added an apostrophe and S. We think the EHRC understood that its investigation was flawed and that it acted unlawfully in singling us out. That is probably why the Equalities watchdog was willing to settle the case without recovering a penny of its exorbitant costs. From what we understand, the Labour Party and CAA also likely to spend thousands of pounds in legal fees through their involvements in the case, which they are also unable to recover. There are many reasons why we finally decided to accept the EHRC's settlement offer. First, in spite of the bold claims made by pro Israel activists, the EHRC report has not had its desired effect. The report hasn't become a legal precedent, and the so called Livingstone formulation is simply a spurious Zionist talking point that no one takes seriously. Moreover, in many ways, our work has been done for us. The EHRC has been mired in scandal after scandal since it's published its report in 2020. It's a thoroughly discredited outfit, and by implication, so is its report. The strategic thing to do now is to redeploy our efforts and finances elsewhere. Pro Israel campaigners have in recent years focused their energies on targeting pro Palestine and pro Zionist. Now, reading that again. Pro Israel campaigners have in recent years focused their energies on targeting pro Palestine and anti Zionist teachers and academics, as well as students themselves, in schools and universities. These pro Israel actors also continue to be at the forefront of campaigns against Muslims and Muslim organizations. Admission at last. Innal batila kana zahuka. There is a lot of important work to be done. We hope that others will take up the mantle and join us in the ongoing fight for freedom of expression and Palestinian liberation. Support groups like the Left Legal Fighting Fund that have helped to open a new front against those who seek to destroy our movement. That is the end of the whole piece that I have now read. And at the end of this is a note from the Morning Star itself. To support the fund, visit www.fightingfund.org stroke donate. Now, this is going back to the Baby Angel Geronimo. This is an organization, EHRC, that was created by Harriet Hattie Harman. Hattie Harman was a cabinet minister in Tony Blair's cabinet. When she promoted, very rapidly promoted the mental slave Trevor Terrible Phillips through various organizations. She made him the chair of the Commission for Racist Enslavement, otherwise known as, used to be known as Commission for Racial Equality. I was present in April 1977 at an event in Shaw Lane, just behind Fleet Street in London, when former Member of Parliament for the Conservatives, David the Racist Moron Lane, held a press conference announcing the coming into being on that day of the Commission for Racial Equality, CRE. I asked questions on the record which typically could not be answered by anyone, most certainly not by David Lane. So that was in 1977. And in the period that followed, 1977 until, let's say, 92, I had attempted to interrogate whoever was in post as chair of the Commission for Racial Enslavement. And the one thing that the CRE and any government minister, any prime minister, does not ever want is to be interrogated on the facts of a matter. So, whenever the CRE, as it then was, held a propaganda event called the press conference with the ethnic minorities, I would try to attend, and I would try to attend solely and simply in order to ask questions. The very last thing that they wanted to be featured at any such event. They wanted the event to be one where the ethnic minorities and mental slaves praise the chair of the day, like Peter, the racist cum, Newsom, etc., etc. Peter Newsom and Ken Livingston confessed in a piece published by The Guardian and The Observer in March 1992, byline to Sarah Bosley, that Newsom had actually standing instructions to CRE staff specifically to block my physical entry into the CRE building. That, that is an admission. Innal batila kana zahuka. Because such an admission could not be extracted from the criminal if I had tried to get the extraction on the record. But in their piece, written with the conspiracy of Sarah Bosley and The Guardian, they thought that they would have won points against me, but it had the opposite effect. Because the piece by Sarah Bosley is headed The Angry Messiah of E1. The Messiah is me, and E1 is London East 1, meaning, mainly meaning Whitechapel, Brick Lane, and so on, the territory that I have been defending, and the territory that my wider kind of family members have been defending for more than 100 years. Now, the Angry Messiah of E1, the piece starts by apparently giving me infinite amount of praise to the point that it says that I could have become the hero of a novel by an Indian writer. Now that's how it starts. And it instantly degenerates into a series of attacks on me by some of the racist, most select racist morons in all of England. Peter Newsom, Ken Livingston, and so on. There is no substance, there is no logic, there is no evidence, most certainly no morality, ethics whatsoever. And it actually contains, the only truth that it contains is the confession of each of them, Ken Livingston and Peter Newsom. The only thing that Livingston didn't admit in that piece as published was the number of events, meetings, propaganda slots that I had interrupted at County Hall over 3-4 years. My calculation is that I had interrupted Ken Livingstone and his cronies at more than 250 to 300 events that Ken Livingstone organized at the County Hall to promote the image of Ken Livingstone. And as far as the admission by Peter Newsom goes, it is a straight admission that he had instructed CRE employees at the reception to stop my entry into the CRE. Now, what would I be doing if I if I were allowed entry? I would not be armed with any weapon except the most powerful moral weapon, which is to ask questions. The most deadly weapon that they don't like is Muhammad Haque asking questions. And that is the vindication as it promises in the Holy Quran, Innal batila kana zahuka. Now, in today's piece in the Morning Star, Ken lies to Livingston and Pam Bromley, in fact, admit as much to the point that they say against exactly what Kingston now because he point is that he had attacked Oliver Feingold. Oliver Feingold was a reporter working for the London Evening Standard. And according to Ken Livingston Livingstone, the worst thing that Oliver Feingold could do was to dare ask him, Ken Livingston Livingstone, to ask a question about anything. So this piece in the Morning Star is obviously self-serving. The only purpose that I'm mentioning this in this context is that it's a record of the fact that the Equalities and Human Rights Commission has settled the case that Livingston and Bromley brought against it. And secondly, that despite the fact that they have got a settlement, they're not publishing the actual terms of the settlement. They're not publishing the details of the exchanges that took place. But despite the fact that there is a settlement, as well as against the Commission for Racist Enslavement. When the Commission for Racist Enslavement was given over to Trevor Terrible Phillips to chair, the clear brief for the mental slave from his mental slaver mistress, Hetty Harman, was to disband the CRE, which he did, and to disband the CRE in order to get rid of the concept of fighting racism, even formally. So when you have the name Commission for Racial Equality replaced by EHRC, you see that there is no racism, either negative or positive. In that name, it's Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is exactly what the mental slave, Trevor Terrible Phillips, did and was his mission to do. Now, when the EHRC was established and Trevor Terrible Phillips was installed as its first bureaucratic head, he proceeded to institutionally and individually publish a set of claims that, in effect, were intended to assert that there was no racism in Britain. But there was, of course, racism, and the fact is that even Ken Livingston is now saying that the EHRC is a discredited outfit. That is his phrase. And there is nothing that Trevor Terrible Phillips, who has been hired Sky News and Murdoch Times, etc., on top of the Daily Mail and other racist outfits. Trevor Terrible Phillips is not able. Trevor Terrible Phillips is not able to dispute any of the many factual evidence against racism that actually dominate the political scene in that context. We shall be talking, of course, more about those all of those items in due course. Going back to the update aspect with this information of the Kudilar television Baby Angel Geronimo Editions essay, what does it mean? It means that the Indian origin criminal, ex solicitor, well, suspended solicitor, Pragnesh Modhiwadia, and his fellow crooks, what they sum up, what they actually represent, is that they are or they have been licensed law traders, but they have been allowed to do the licensed law trade even if they are doing whatever they've been doing under the banner of licensed law trade has in fact been robbery and theft and fraud. And Jonathan Ames's reference to the fact that he asked questions, he put questions to the Solicitors Regulation Authority, which has not responded to the questions, gives the game away for the Solicitors Regulation Authority. And this despite the fact that the current president in the Solicitors Society, Law Society, is the second ethnicity linked woman called Lubna Sheikh. Now, Lubna Sheikh is a complete absolute mental slave, which is the pre-qualification, the first qualification for any licensed law trader or whatever to be given any position like that. Lubna Sheikh has got a few days left before she leaves that post and is followed by somebody else. But Lubna Sheikh has had, in effect, 1 year in which Lubna Sheikh has failed, absolutely failed to sum up the corrupt role played by solicitors, the corrupt role played by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the corrupt role and racist role played by the various organs of the law society and the judiciary. Lubna Sheikh can only be described as being there to add to the list of the recent trend, which is to display stage ethnic diversity display. Ethnic diversity display is itself a racist act because it is to the supposedly unsuspecting public that the organization where the display is taking place is no longer racist and has individuals that look like Lubna Sheikh or her African origin predecessor, who herself was and remains, of course, a racist stooge, mental slave. As I said recently, and as I said originally, the Sikh judge, the first Sikh judge in England, was a judge called who was who was involved in the consideration. I'll come to that in a minute. The Sikh judge that was involved in the case of Mr. Saif Ali against Sidney Mitchells Mota Singh. Mota Singh was an anti-Muslim criminal, mental slave, who had no difficulty issuing his anti-Muslim bias against Mr. Saif Ali. Now there is this praise for this criminal in a piece that is headed "The Great Sir Mota Singh." This is dated the 27th of February 2023. It was here when Mr. Singh QC became the first judge to not wear the horse-haired wig. Over the years at Sadak Crown Court, this is, of course, a tribute piece by Sikhs in law in praise of Mota Singh. It's a, it's a corrupt piece by a corrupt firm of soul cheaters called Duncan Lewis. Now, Duncan Lewis is a bunch of criminals that had a Tower Hamlets councillor who went to jail last What is a legal solicitor supposed to be? Solicitors are supposed to be legal, you fucking shits. His Honor Sir Mota Singh, QC, visited legal solicitor Louis to was educated in Kenya, and England, and called to the bar by the Honorable Society of Lincoln's in 1956, and practiced in Kenya as an advocate of the Supreme Court, as well as being elected as the alderman of the city of Nairobi and a member of the Kenya Parliament. Upon returning to England in 1960, his honor Sir Mota Singh QC went into chamber in 1967 to practice at the bar and was appointed a member of the Race Relations Board by the Home Office shortly after, a post that he held for the next 12 years. Now, this criminal was a member of the Race Relations Board while he attacked Mr. Saif Ali. So, this criminal, Mota Singh, was one of the primary mental slaves used by the racists in Britain in the judiciary. And he dismissed Mr. Saif Ali's rights altogether, and he upheld the rights of the criminal, barrister, as well as the firm of solicitor, firm of lawyers, law traders that was in contest against Mr. Saif Ali's claims. So, what I'm saying is that the fact that somebody is a lawyer, licensed law trader, at any stage, either as a litigation advocate or a litigation defendant, does not in any way represent any shred of the truth by them, nor does the fact that someone sitting as a judge has been a licensed law trader before they got appointed a judge, does not represent that these people have any concern for the standards of morality, ethics, due process, etc., which is what happened repeatedly in the cases that were brought to prove the innocence of the innocent baby angel Geronimo. All these liars, either defending baby angel Geronimo or those who opposed baby angel Geronimo, all of them lied origin, Pragnesh Modhadia. Is it Modhadia? Modhadia. Modhwadia. Pragnesh Modhwadia set up business in Mayfair, and in the piece that Jonathan Ames has written, Modhwadia, one of the things that they did was to steal money from clients as if that money was their own, which is, Ames doesn't mention that, but that is theft. Using somebody else's property is theft according to the 1968 Theft Act. Because the 1968 Theft Act, let's go back to the 1968 Theft Act. An act, this 1968 Theft Act says a person is guilty of theft if he dishonestly appropriates property belonging to another with the intention of permanently depriving the other of and thief and steal shall be construed accordingly. And it is immaterial whether the appropriation is made with a view to gain or is made for the thief's own benefit. The five following sections of the Act, that is 1968 Theft Act, shall have effect as regards the interpretation and operation of the section, and except as otherwise provided by the Act, shall apply only for purposes of this section. So there is a description of what is basic definition of theft. The Pragnesh was a thief. So, in his piece, the headline has got the word fraud, which is also part of the Theft Act. But Jonathan Ames himself fails to discuss the actual extent of racist thefts, criminals operating under the law. And he doesn't mention the number of solicitors that are criminals, number of barristers, licensed law traders that are criminals, and thieves. And in the coverage or cover ups of the various aspects of the argument that Baby Angel made through his mum, Helen MacDonald, who instructed the licensed law traders to the best of our knowledge and ability, all the instructions and all the information, all the facts and the data that Helen MacDonald made available to the officially acting solicitor instructing Catherine McGahey on behalf of Baby Angel Geronimo. All the details were left out, at least as the contents of the ruling published and accessible in public in the name of Griffiths, the lying High Court judge, dated the 29th of July 2021. None of the actual details that actually reflect day to day experience of an alpaca, and especially day to day experience of the relationship between a beloved alpaca and his mom, they're not explained. So when it says that despite the legislation despite the fact that there is no evidence, that there is no hard evidence that baby angel Geronimo was actually infected, the Secretary of State is entitled, says the criminal, to disregard any requirement of evidence. And Jonathan Ames doesn't say, despite the fact that he says that he contacted the Solicitor Regulation Authority and they didn't reply, he doesn't say that this is not an exception, that the overwhelming majority of solicitors, as well as the overwhelming majority of lawyers or barristers, are allowed de facto, in effect, impunity from accountability for their criminality. So that is the actual status quo. The status quo being the lawyers are not required to meet the requirements of truthfulness, morality, impartiality, compassion. And of course, there is no reference to any of the treaties, any declarations, any agreements, any conventions in anything that Jonathan Ames has written in the Times brief on Thursday that I have been reading from. So, if the legal editor of the Times doesn't do the comprehensive piece about a multi-million pound criminality enterprise fronted by this criminal Pragnesh, then where can the actual truth be found? Most certainly not in a court of law. Because most of the legal proceedings are couched in secrecy, are shrouded in secrecy. Just an example, the section called the on the back or in the back in the private eye printed magazine has got a token piece of law or legal reporting. But it's so obscure and so difficult to relate to the actual day to day reality of the truth of what goes on in the courts that it becomes a deterrent to try to make sense. Is it because of the midget, Private Lies editor Ian Pissoff, so stupid? Or is it because the de facto constipation called Francis Swine is forever constipated and he cannot write an accessible piece about the law? For months now, they have been publishing alleged accounts about the legal dispute between the surviving Barclay and his Japanese ex wife of 30 years, Madame Hiroto, and the order given by the judge, High Court judge, to Sir Frederick Barclay to pay her £100 million. There are itsy bitsy references to the contradictory amounts, whether they have access to the amounts or whether they haven't. But there is no real cohesive piece about the wealth of the surviving Barclays or the actual financial capacity they have to retain the ownership of the telegraph, which has been undergoing all kinds of speculation, etc., etc. So the legal reality, as reported by the newspapers, is as obscure as the search for evidence looking for truth and justice in the English judicial system, which is a bureaucracy corrupt to the core. We shall be talking more about this Pragnesh as well as about the lying still Ken Livingstone and the EWH and why EHRC and why is the CPGB Communist Party's morning scar as obscure. And so far as I can see at 2051 GMT, there is no evidence that the Guardian is running that story yet. It may do, but not as far as I can see at this moment. Just before ending this program, let's see if we can. Now, the only piece that is there on the Guardian is Russell Brand, who's been accused of rape, sexual assault, and emotional abuse. Now, we have posted the first comment on Russell Brand saying that he's an evil individual. And we have said that because he and evil Jonathan Ross mocked a grandfather by leaving a message on his telephone answering system, mocking him and boasting that they had had sex with his granddaughter. Or at least one of them had sex with his granddaughter. And there is a piece about Rory Stewart writing a piece in The Guardian, repeating substantially his main allegations against the congenital liar Boris Johnson. This is The Guardian's introduction. When he arrived in 2010, Rory Stewart was surrounded by people who looked like him and shared some of the same assumptions. Then, as the world changed in unimaginable ways, he watched in horror as the people in charge failed to change with it. It is December 2015. I am the Minister for Flooding. I am also the Minister for Forestry, for National Parks, for Nature, for Chemicals, for Air Quality, for Waste and Recycling, for Water, and more than can be written on a business card. I knew almost nothing about any of these topics when 6 months earlier the Prime Minister David Cameron made me minister for these things. It may have been a mistake. In a recent meeting, he has given me the impression that he believes I am the Minister for Agriculture. Exactly 341 millimeter of rain has fallen in the last 24 hours, the highest rainfall ever recorded in the United Kingdom. More than 60,000 houses in Lancashire have lost power, and the epicenter of the flooding is my own constituency in Cumbria. I have been wading into front rooms filled with dirty water above the level of the mantel shelves. Their interiors a swirling mess of photo albums and wooden furniture. Bloated corpses of sheep lie strewn across field edges. Business owners are staring in horror at the destruction of their stockrooms and getting no response from the insurance agencies. My notebook is filled with names and emails and requests from residents. Now it is just after dawn, and I have been dressed in an environment agency coat and high vis jacket and put in front of the television cameras. My feet are wet and cold because I made the mistake of tucking my waterproof trousers into my wellies. Behind me, in the halogen lights of a winter morning, rescuers in boats are drifting down Warwick Road in Carlisle, lifting families from upstairs windows. Journalists are finding different ways of asking me how I could possibly have allowed this to happen. There are some earnest but imprecise link the flooding to climate change. Finally, I insist the flood walls are working well. The only problem is that the water is coming over the top. This idiotic line is then replayed across all the networks and is selected by Have I Got News for You as one of the political blunders of the year. In the floodwater in 2015, I felt like a minor player in Yes Minister or the thick of it, part of an ancient tradition of underqualified and off balance ministers wrapped in the old concept of British politics. And on the surface, the political universe seemed very stable. An election had just happened. Two Oxford educated former special advisors in their mid to late 40s, David Cameron and George Osborne, had just defeated two Oxford educated former special advisors in their mid to late 40s, Ed Miliband and Ed Balls. They had tried, for the sake of the election, to draw clear lines, but in truth, they shared beliefs about the world which they had developed during their 20s and early 30s. The period just after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, they had left Oxford and become high flying party aides and aspiring politicians. These first 15 years of their political careers was a period of striking optimism and consensus, occasionally interrupted by scandal and domestic crisis, cash for honors, foot and mouth, and flooding. The Cold War had ended. The number of democracies in the world had doubled. In Bosnia and Kosovo, international interventions had ended wars and brought war criminals to justice at minimal cost to the West. There was confidence in global efforts to address climate change and global poverty. The UK economy, rooted in privatization, deregulation, and globalization, had generated the fastest growing per capita GDP in the G6. Now, this is an part of an extract that the Guardian online is running. What a load of rubbish! This is not telling the truth. Whatsoever he has not mentioned a single family, he has not mentioned a single individual case between an individual and one council, or between an individual and one councillor, between an individual and a member of parliament. And he has not mentioned the absence of any accountability at any stage anywhere in the United Kingdom. So, this is what the Guardian does. What we shall be doing is ending this particular edition at this point, 20:59 GMT, on Saturday, the 16th of September 2025. We'll be continuing on all the outstanding, incomplete parts of the updates overdue.